You are now live.
We are now live. We're going to continue. Witnesses have arrived early, and we read it earlier. We're going to take up S269. That is the Energy Savings Account Partnership Pilot Program that we put into effect probably 3 years ago, and then it got derailed by COVID, and the request is to extend it. So all right. I'm trying to, is Ellen our drafter on this?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you drop her a line and see if she's available?
I just did.
Okay. Great minds think alike. All right. So we're going to start with this one. We've been through it once. And
this simply appears to extend the program for an extra year, and whatever else was in
yes,
the current statute remains the same. And we recognize that they got off to a slow start through COVID, and we do not wish to interfere with their current.
right. And there was one other in here that asked to extend it. In addition, I think they're at an additional 18 months. And then said.
So it's the benefit from the results.
So we will get results, so we'll know if it worked.
Yep.
And then the commission, which is the Public Utility Commission, can allow current participants in the pilot or to decline in this extension, or they may, they can either decline in writing to take part, so anyone in it can drop out, or they can ask for an additional 3 years, and that caused some concern in the committee. And so I'm gonna go, no, that's in there. So I'm gonna walk through, I've got, Dan Riley is with us. I don't know, the witnesses have a presentation set up for us, or if you're here to answer questions. I think that 3-year extension, there was some concern we were extending the whole pilot program. Can someone explain to us what that extension, I think we understand you need another 18 months to just get this off the ground. And then, and anybody that wants to drop out now, is there 12 or 13 participants? They just say, no, we're just not there yet. They can drop out. Nobody new can come in. But what's the 3-year extension for? I'm looking. Okay, Mr. Brooks, and just identify yourself for the record.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and other committee members. For the record, Tate Brooks, Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Commerce and Community. I think where a good starting point for this, Madam Chair, is that we think the draft would need some clarification. So it was the intent to have the 18 months for the ability to have the accrual, but after that 18 months, not have the ability to continue to accrue that money up to 3 years. So again, I know Ledge Council was just going off our bullet points and putting the draft together, but the draft has, at least the draft working off, doesn't quite reflect, I think, what our proposal was.
Okay, so your proposal was, because right now, the money these organizations would have paid into the Renewable Energy Fund are essentially being held in escrow. They're paying them in. they can then draw the money they have paid in out to do another approved thermal energy program. I assume they could also do an electric energy program. And we did, you had a whole bunch of bullet points, and we did send our drafter out to draft. So on this one, what you're really asking for is, and I'm looking for my pen, that they would stop, thank you, they would stop accruing money after the 18 months.
Correct. And I think, there was some confusion around that from the last time the committee met, is my understanding. And so a number of us did get together earlier in the week, and credit to TJ Poor, we did kind of come up with some additional language that we think would address the committee's concern. So I don't know if maybe this is a good time to toss over to TJ for some of the language that he.
Yeah, I think it is. And then they'd have an additional 3 years to spend down the money they had already accrued, right?
Correct. So that's an important point in that they're not continuing to accrue for that additional 3 years.
Okay. So, Mr. Poor.
Yeah. Thank you. TJ Poor, Director of Planning at the Department of Public Service. And thank you, Mr. Brooks, for the credit, although I think this was really, most of it was created by the coordination with, just responding to the discussion here and wanting to clarify, and discussion with the participants as well. And so really I think the change could be in provision 4. And I just have it really briefly on I wonder if it'd be useful for me to share my screen here to show you the language.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, can you see my screen? I can make this bigger too.
You need to make it a lot larger. There you go.
Are you able to?
Yes, I can see that. If I can see it, anyone can.
Was that? Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Was that yes or no? Is it working?
That's good.
Okay, great. So this is I'm sorry.
One question.
Before the witness testifies, I'm trying to understand what we're looking at. And I have two.
Okay.
When the bill was originally passed years ago, whatever, would the money have been available for a period of 3 years from one point to 3 years later? Or would the money have been available to the project from the time in which the project was approved until a later date? What was the existing law that we are amending?
So what was the original timeline? When we did the original bill, did you start accruing the money after the project was approved? And then how long did you have to spend and accrue? Was it 3 years for both? You accrued it for 3 years and then you could spend it in the same 3 years?
As soon as you entered the program, you accrued money and were able to spend that money. Oh, I'm sorry, you accrued the money until to the end of the pilot, which is currently scheduled to be June of this year, 2022.
Okay, so you accrued it for 3 years.
You accrued it for the 3 years, but then you are able to, if the money is obligated, you would still be able to spend it beyond that 3-year period. You would stop accruing, but you'd still be able to spend it beyond that 3-year period.
Okay, so if you
That's
had
the
a
original-
contract
that's the
to
original.
redo a building that was going to take 5 years to complete, as long as you had signed the contract, you could continue to pay it with the money you had already accrued. Up to,
Correct.
okay,
So could you accrue and spend only 3 years worth of money?
yes.
Correct.
Thank you.
So the change that the change that's being proposed here is to extend through for 18 months the ability to accrue, and then make it very clear that you can also you stop accruing after that 18 months, so they until December 31st, 2023, and then you have an additional 3 years in order which to spend it, so that it doesn't go on forever in perpetuity, that you just have kind of this pot of money, but that you that's what the from January 1st, 2024, you stop accruing, but you can still spend the previously accrued money through December 31st, 2026.
Okay,
Which, are you saying that the length of time that you may accrue money remains a 3-year period? Or have you added yet a 1.5 years of additional accruement?
There has been time of additional accruement added here, so that you can accrue from, what's new is the ability to accrue from July 1st, 2022 until December 31st, 2023.
okay, so they have added a 1.5 years of accrual.
So you've increased by 50% the amount of money that from the original bill. 50% of additional accruement from the original bill,
That's correct.
and the rationale for that is?
The rationale for that is to allow these energy transformation projects that haven't had a chance to happen to actually see if we can make them happen. And because of the kind of short time frame and COVID, there have been some investments made, but there was this, in talking with the participants, and my understanding is that there was some urgency to try and, hey, we need to get things going and move, but it really wasn't enough to make these big transformational projects happen because the timing started to run short. And so we've had some projects kind of lined up, and now this, additional accrual will really give a chance for the pilot to see if those transformational type projects can still really happen. And I invite Deputy Secretary Brooks to add on to that.
So there is additional money being granted in this proposal before us because the companies would like the additional money. This committee has said that it understands that COVID has delayed things and is willing to extend the time period in order for the delay not to interfere with this experiment. But you want more money also, is that correct?
There is an additional amount of money, yes, that's correct.
And other than the companies simply wishing to have that extra money to spend that wouldn't have been available if there hadn't been a COVID, you're recommending we increase the amount of money by 50% for, what's the rationale other than the companies would like to have?
Not in this manner, the money wouldn't have been available. They would have been eligible for Efficiency Vermont programs in this 18 months. So it's not a it's kind of moving the availability or moving them back, keeping those participants out of the Efficiency Vermont programs, which they would have been eligible to participate in, and keeping them in this pilot.
Okay.
And I want to turn it to Deputy Secretary Brooks to
Okay, but just
elaborate.
a clarifying question. They are putting in the money they would have put into the Renewable Energy Fund. They have an approved project, right? They can only, they don't get to spend all of the money. They only get to spend the amount that's been approved. So that if they don't use the additional money, then that reverts to the Renewable Energy Fund. Have I got that sequence?
If they don't spend the money and have approved projects to spend the money, it would go to the, or remain in the Electric Efficiency Fund.
Okay, so
That would be true if it were only 3 years instead of 4.5 years of money, would it not?
Yeah, yes.
So what's the rationale for the extra 1.5 years of money that the original bill
Okay.
didn't authorize?
let's see if Mr. Brooks can help us with rationale.
So let me, if I can assist Madam Chair and Senator McDonald. So again, just one additional point, just in regards to the timing. Obviously, we talked about COVID and supply chain. Just also as a reminder, it took about a year for the rules to come out on the PUC. So even though we were talking about a 3-year pilot program, it really narrowed down to 2. And then obviously you're aware of the other aspects that we mentioned. In regards to more directly answer Senator McDonald's question, again, participants, these 9 pilot participants have been looking and staring down at this end date coming this summer. And so they've been working, not thinking that there was necessarily going to be an extension, and putting proposals together to spend down and utilize those dollars, recognizing that some of those pilot participants had envisioned much more transformational projects. In order for those transformational projects to occur, another 18 months is needed. At least that's what we've heard.
Okay, there's time and there's money. I think Senator McDonald is concerned that they were allowed to accrue 3 years of money. I assume they have been accruing that, or have they only been, did they start accruing after when did they start putting money away? Before or after the rules were finished? Because if they lost a year waiting for rules, then this isn't quite as big an issue. Do you know when they started putting money aside?
You'll let Mr. Westman confirm, but I believe they started accruing immediately as soon as they entered the program when it was authorized.
That is correct. All of the participants replied to the RFP with the understanding that they would be joining the program effective July 2019, upon which they began their accruals. Correct.
Okay, but the rules didn't come out until 2020. Senator Brock.
Well, as I'm listening to this, what I'm hearing is that although they began accruing, there was a definite end date to the project based on the original legislation. There was no understanding that the participant has that this program could or would be extended in any way, and so they were faced with the inability, based on COVID and based on the timeline of the PUC decision, to be able to affect the transformational programs that this entire project involved. And so as a result, facing that, my understanding is that what the companies did in a number of cases is to do those projects that they could do based on the funds that they had and the timeline with which they were faced. But what that means is we never had the opportunity to do the kind of testing of the original idea of transformational projects, which is why we passed this in the first place. Now, if that logic is correct, at least that's what I heard in the testimony the last time, what that means is that if we want to take the original idea that we approved vis-a-vis these transformational projects and do them, then that's why we need both the additional time and the additional money to do that. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think you articulated it better than I did.
Yeah, from my perspective, Senator, that would be correct.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then, to make sure we're all hearing the same thing, is that COVID hit. The original idea was that these companies were gonna do some big project, something, and I think we heard from the folks that redid their machines. They did electroplating, and if they had more time, they could have done more machines, and this was electric and saved a lot. But some of the other companies then went more towards the smaller change, the light bulb projects, rather than revamping and re-insulating and redoing a factory.
They did minor projects because that's what they could do based on the guidance that they had at the time, the permission they had at the time, and the constraints that they had at the time based on COVID and also regulatory slowness.
Okay, yeah, because that they lost a year waiting for the thing. They had a 2-year deadline at that point. And we had COVID, and we also have had supply chain and labor issues, which have, and now we have inflation.
All of which is true.
Yes.
Okay.
So the question is, where do we go from here? Do we say there have been some costs increases?
I have a question.
Okay.
So for those companies that did start on time and accrued for 3 years and are finishing on schedule, they get 3 years worth of money, they're finishing on schedule. That's not a problem. We wouldn't be here if all the companies involved were in that situation. But we're here because some companies were delayed by COVID as much as 18 months, and they didn't get started. And we've extended the time so that those companies might start a year and a half late may also participate with 3 years worth of money, complete a 3-year project, and have it evaluated when it's done. So that seems pretty simple. Why does it appear that because you were late, you get to have 4.5 years of money to operate? Where does that connection come from?
I think the first question is, did anybody go through the process and complete? Because my impression was they hadn't.
Well, that's so. My questions are, if you started on time and you got your 3 years, that you're in good shape. If you started 18 months late and you were entitled to your 3 years, you're also in good shape. Where does the 4.5 years worth of money come from that didn't exist in the beginning, and why would it be available? Why would that extra funding be available because of COVID? A 3-year experiment is a 3-year experiment with 3 years worth of money, and there's a test, an evaluation at the end of 3 years. Who dreamed up the 4.5 years, and where did it come from?
I think this has been a group effort. Okay, Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The earlier draft had also entertained the idea that more companies could come in or possibly could apply. And that's not in the language we're actually being asked to consider, right?
Right.
That seems an important thing to point to me, because I'm sort of interested in acknowledging the timeline challenges that this experiment's have, and to be generous, if you like, and make sure that we do a half decent experiment in the spirit of really finding out what's going on. Is it fair to say that maybe Mr. Poor could say that, or help me answer, that the experiment was, and I think Senator McDonald was just kind of saying this, was give us 3 years, we'll show you that we can do an effective job. And because of this getting slow out of the gate and the COVID challenges, the 3 years has been chopped up, and then people were thinking, well, it's about to end, so they'll just use the money in some way so they don't have to just give it all back. And so they're not able to conduct the most effective experiment that they would like to. And so now we're trying to reframe the timeline, but only for them. Is that if I'm on your side, is that the way to describe it?
Yes, that's accurate. And to the direct question is that this does not contemplate any new participants coming in this extended period. So, but you described it accurately, yes.
But in terms of Senator McDonald is acknowledging that there's more money coming in and it's a longer period, but would a justification for that be to sort of a company saying, look, we really want to show you what's possible in a 3-year window when we have control and predictability, and that's what this draft has us contemplating setting up. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So Madam Chair, I would just say for me, I never loved this, but I do think there's value in seeing if it really works. And, I guess I'm convinced that this is the way to do that. I don't know if that matters to anybody, but I think that's where I'm coming from at the moment.
It was explained to me, I think in the hall, that the 3-year extension was to complete some of the, you can't get any more, but you might have your planning, your design, your contractors and everything signed up. But given supply and manpower and all the rest, it might take you 3 additional years to finish. No new ones, no new projects, just to finish up the project that was approved. That's what that 3 years was. You didn't have to have it finished in 18 months. You got 3 years, you got 18 months to get your project approved and get the money committed under contract. And then you had 3 years to actually finish the project. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yes, but yes, so both of those things I think are consistent. So there's the 18 months of accrual and extension to show what we can really do, and then the accrual stops, and then but the projects have been obligated and chosen, and we're ready to move forward. We have 3 more years to actually finish the implementation. And if you think of something big and transformational, like a combined heat and power project with permitting and other and construction time and things that take time, that's what that 3 years following the 18 months is for.
Okay.
So Madam Chair,
Yes.
we had an experiment where you got to use 3 years of money.
Yes.
And we're going to evaluate it to see how valuable it is and worthwhile for, I guess, the companies. Do it.
No, it was for energy savings.
Excuse me?
It was for energy savings.
Yes, but it is being funded with electric energy money.
Yes.
It's not for energy savings
Electric.
with general fund money or gasoline money. And we're going to evaluate it, and we're going to be evaluating, how do you evaluate a 3-year block of money and then compare it to a 4.5-year block of money that's expended over 3 years? They're apples and oranges. If I were the company, I would find any excuse to use more of other electric contributors to do more stuff for myself and my people and my stockholders at any opportunity that presented itself. And it's a 3-year experiment, it's a 3-year experiment, but now we're comparing 3.5 to 4.5. It's a money grab based, it's a money grab based on COVID that has no justification as an experiment.
I think what we're asking is, if you invest, because we have this whole climate change thing, and the only way we've found to get money so far is through the electric rates. You remember at the same time, we also allowed electric money that we got for forward capacity to be used. We asked the PUC to take a block of money and use that electric money to try and get energy savings in other fuel areas. And this was the same one. The question is, this is the money these folks would have been paying in.
This is the money that these folks owe to the system,
That's right.
just like you and I and other committee members owe money to the system.
Right. But the question is, would the energy savings universe make a better profit by allowing these companies to do some major project with them, then not pay it in? Or would we be better off paying it in and helping people like me buy light bulbs? I mean, we've been doing electric efficiency and we've been very successful, but we're trying to do a broader range of efficiency, and the pilot was to see if this might work. Now, I understand the 18 months, but and that's the question. We invested. If we kill this here, we're probably going to have a windfall, and how are we going to use that in Efficiency Vermont? The question is, do we want to continue this? And we can leave the 18 months of accrual aside. The first question is, do we want to continue it and bring it to completion so we know?
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
Okay.
That's why we extended it for the 18 months that COVID delayed.
We
The
haven't done
experiment is-
anything.
The experiment is alive and well, and the people that are making the request have asked for another 1.5 years of other people's money. And we apparently are willing to say, I would say no.
Okay. We can
Experiment was a 3
disagree,
year.
and I have a feeling these people would disagree on whether or not it was up to
Of course they
money.
disagree with it. There's a lot of money at stake, and all they have to do is say yes, and they've
Okay.
disagreed.
All right. We're getting into pejorative language. I want to keep this,
Investments,
if I remember correctly, you didn't like the original bill either.
but we went with it.
All right, we're here. First question. First question is Mr. Poor, Ellen Chakowski has joined us. Hi, Ellen. Can you email your proposed amendment to Faith or to Ellen? And we can get, if we agree with that. No, that's what he just put up on the screen. It was the clarifying language that you couldn't keep, you stopped accruing and you had the extra 3 years to spend it. But you stopped accruing after the 18 months. And I think that did it. But, so the first question is this committee ready to extend this program for 18 months and then allow an additional 3 years to spend that accrued money down? They will accrue that, basically says you can accrue for 18 months and then you have 3 years to spend it down. And I think the rationale is it isn't all sitting there. They've done other projects to do it. So
Question.
Senator,
I don't know who this question is for, so anybody on the screen.
well, try me.
Okay, or you. So we're not letting new companies in. We're extending the accrual by 18 months, the program by 3 years. There's still a reporting of some kind or study of some kind to show us if this actually works.
Yes.
I hit see nods, yes. And the companies that did the big projects, like the really complicated.
That was the Roma, the electroplating. Yeah, down in Brattleboro.
That's all great, and I'm really interested to see what happens with that. But what about the companies that didn't do the big projects? Are you gonna ask them to do a bigger project? Just, I want, Senator Brock says yes. Can
All
somebody
right,
on the
so
screen
I'm
clarify?
looking at, Mr. Poor, you seem to become the spokesperson here.
I don't know how that happened, but that's
Keep it
okay.
simple.
We didn't duck fast enough.
So the question is, are we going to ask the companies to do those big transformational projects?
Yeah, are they gonna be required to do that now that we're giving them more time and money?
Well, they're going to be required to do more projects. I don't know that we want to, I don't want to go so far as saying you must do a transformational project without that being defined or without it, with it being strict. Because as Madam Chair said, I think the goal of this pilot was to evaluate whether companies retaining their efficiency charge to spend that then by themselves, on their own to do their own energy projects, whether or not that provided better results than the results that were being seen
Right.
from the efficiency charge. And
Right.
so I still, we do want those big transformational projects to happen because that would turn into better results. But, in some respects, it's up to the companies to do these transformational projects to show that, that this is working.
Okay, I guess I will borrow the analogy that the chair made. There are some companies that were doing these really big projects, and then there were some that were just sort of changing light bulbs because they got stuck in COVID. So the companies that are just changing the light bulbs, I know that's just an analogy, that's not really what's happening. But so those companies, they would have to change a lot of light bulbs, right, to make that seem worth it. Whereas the companies that are doing these bigger projects would just do a couple of these big machines and it would save them a lot of energy. So, but what I'm hearing from you is you're not going to set any kind of, there aren't already requirements, or you're not going to provide additional requirements that they change a lot more light bulbs.
We're not going to provide additional requirements, and there's general requirements on what they can spend the money on. Light bulbs would be an eligible measure, but that one, as you said, that one will show that the investment isn't as good as an Efficiency Vermont investment, and so for the customer or the state. So
that could be a control case, perhaps.
Right. I think we've kind of skipped over. It took a year to write the rules. This isn't just you get to keep the money and you do what you want with it. We had to write rules, and then the company had to come in with a plan as to how they were going to save, and that plan had to be approved. I see Mr. Westman's hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is correct that an energy management plan needs to be on file with the Public Utility Commission which would represent the scope of work that the participant companies would then engage activities on. If 18 months were extended to the accrual of these projects, I would anticipate that the energy management plans that have been filed so far would need to be updated, because there would be, as Senator McDonald pointed out, 50% additional funding for them to spend on their projects. That would probably be new projects. It could also be enlargement of projects that are already written in their energy management plans. By and large, those plans are written by the companies, and Efficiency Vermont is only involved in them in the screening of the specific measures to make sure that they pass the societal cost effectiveness test as has been defined in this project.
Okay, then they will be evaluated on the end results. So if they say we're going to save 8,000 and we only save 4,000, that will be part of what we learned, that we didn't get the return that the companies projected. Is that, there'll be an evaluation at the end?
That is my understanding of what the evaluation would contemplate, yes. And I would add to that, not only would it look at the savings that are estimated, but the cost per savings. And that is a critical component for evaluating the success of any project, whether that be an energy savings account or an efficiency program that we implement every day.
Okay, so it isn't just, now when they just, COVID hit and they couldn't get, well, we only had 1 or 2 that got approved plans. Everything came to a halt.
No, I have that in here. Currently, we have 4 of the 9 participating companies having filed an energy management plan. That was as of January when I addressed this committee.
Okay.
I don't believe there have been any,
And
but there may
are
have
they
been
all
one.
approved?
There is not actually an approval process. It's more of a review process that the Efficiency Vermont and the department undergo prior to the filing.
But if they said we're just going to change all the light bulbs, you'd say no.
No, we would screen it and we would say that those changing of the light bulbs passes the societal cost effectiveness test, and so therefore you could spend your project funds on it. We don't have any ability to say yay or nay to a project based on its uniqueness or transformational attributes.
Transformational is a word that has popped up in this discussion. I don't remember it in the prior discussion.
So it's approved. What is approved?
No, he said he doesn't approve it. They have to look at it and it has to meet the goals.
So we've been using the word approved for the last 40 minutes. Has any project been rejected so far?
Is that a question for me, Senator?
Whoever.
I believe that we have received various drafts from multiple participants, and some have had to be revised based on either procedural or project characteristics. So, for example, I believe a company filed an energy management plan without vetting it through the screening or the department first, and so we have since had to go back and make some minor edits. But again, we cannot tell a company not to proceed with a project simply because it isn't unique enough. If it passes that test, that's really all that we are empowered to.
What test?
The societal screening test. The societal screening test is the same test that the efficiency utilities apply for every measure that we implement today. This ESA pilot program was approved to also include an economic development test, and that added 10% benefits to every project completed on the basis of, I believe, cost, but I could be incorrect on that. It's either cost or energy savings. I'm not entirely versed, but it's worth noting that economic development adder is incremental, is not in the day-to-day energy efficiency screening tool. That's unique to this pilot.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Efficiency tests for electricity are mathematical costs. Economic development tests are in the mind of the beholder.
Yeah.
And I can see at this point, I should stop asking questions because this is a giveaway of money with little or no basis for assessment. And if I were eligible to do this, I could spend it on pretty much whatever I wanted to. So I'm gonna stop. And
Okay.
we're gonna go ahead and either give them more money to do something that isn't tested or not.
This is the test, and I believe that what I heard is it goes through the same efficiency screening as if I were saving electric efficiency with electric money.
It can't, because electric efficiency is dollar per savings of kilowatt. And we're not dealing in kilowatts, we're dealing in fossil
Okay.
fuel measures and other
So,
things.
Mr. Westman, is this translated into thermal fuels? I mean, have you,
I appreciate Senator McDonald's distinction, and there is a screening tool for thermal measures, and it's based on the cost of the project to the benefits that accrue for measures that reduce the use of fuel use. We count the MMBTUs and the cost of those MMBTUs that would be avoided. We count the greenhouse gas emissions that are avoided as a externality benefit. So it's not the same screening tool, it's a different tool, but generally it always measures dollars. It equates everything into dollars and is the project cost less than the benefits that would accrue from the completion of the project. That's ultimately the test.
all right, I'm gonna go to, okay.
Every dollar that's spent for electric efficiency that makes any improvement at all is shared by every electric purchaser in the state. This experiment takes money and saves the applicants money on their bottom line with absolutely no electric benefit to everyone else in the state. So by definition, they're gonna, I said I was gonna stop before, I will stop again. So I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I'm done.
Okay. I had Senator Gray, then Senator Peterson, then Senator Brock. And we are over time now.
So this is a question, I think, for Mr. Westman. It's really, it's in a way, it's a follow-up to Senator McDonald's last non-question, which, because he stopped, but it was, how do you describe and it gets at the same point. We look at the benefit to all and regular energy efficiency projects because of shared reduce load, et cetera. And
Yeah, system benefits, yes.
system benefits, thank you. So how do you describe the system benefits of these projects?
If they are reducing electric load, they would count towards those same system benefits.
Right.
And reduced use of fossil fuel for thermal or process uses do not have the same or equivalent system benefits. I think that is accurate. Let me give you an example. In an electric efficiency screening process, we consider avoided distribution costs and avoided transmission and distribution costs. Those benefits are bundled for reasons that are not worth explaining here today, but avoided T&D costs are sort of an example of system benefits that accrue through the reduction of kilowatt hours. There is no equivalent to T&D that is quantified in the avoidance of fossil fuel in thermal benefits. And so that is an example of how those screening tools differ.
Okay. So we're always wary of cross subsidies. Does this, in essence, end up meaning that it's a cross subsidy where we take electrically based energy efficiency charges and then apply them to the thermal sector? And how is that an accurate assessment? And then how do you come to a place where you say, well, I think it's justified because our screening tool delivers benefits and merits what I think is a cross subsidy?
Thank you, Senator. I actually think ACCD might be and Mr. Brooks might be a good spokesperson for the value of why the original pilot was was identified for the participating companies. But I will just say that it was sort of explicitly discussed as the reason for the economic benefit adder in the screening tool was to this point, which was essentially, could these participating customers put these dollars to use in terms of improving their plant and capital, which would then keep these companies vibrant and active within Vermont, and as essentially a way to continue and assure that they are investing in themselves and their communities. And I would defer to my colleague.
And it is a cross subsidy. That was the pilot. I mean, we're using electric money to do thermal fuels, and that's the reason for the pilot. We also allowed the PUC to use some electric money as a way. It's all part of climate change and reducing emissions, but it is a pilot.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to understand the screen actually more accurately. I think, is it possible, are there benefits, they wouldn't be system benefits, that could come from these projects, non-electric load reduction projects, that an electric load reduction project might not offer at large? For instance, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce pollutants as part of emissions. So you might end up delivering community benefits, but just not in a form that load reduction delivers. And do you assess that? And do you value that in the screening tool?
As I said, the economic development adder sort of gets at. I mean, short answer, yes, the greenhouse gas emissions are absolutely quantified in that thermal reduction. So that is accurate. Generally, those would be very high emitting sources of fossil fuel like kerosene or diesel or oil. But to this point of the economic development adder, that is the other sort of it's not an electric system benefit, but it was perceived as a possible benefit to the communities for the long-term viability of the participating companies.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, and I don't think we've talked about that much this year. I mean, the other component of being able to participate in the pilot program is, it's going to be a company, an entity in rural Vermont. And as we've seen the real economic challenges throughout the country, frankly, throughout the world in regards to rural areas, that was an important aspect to tie into this pilot.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to have to wrap this up because we are way over time. But if you can get this back on, if you can email your proposed language change to Faith or Mabel or Ellen, or we'll get it to Ellen, have her make that adjustment, and then I'll put this back on for a final decision. I think this is, do we extend the program we started 4 years ago, and we've got 3 years ago, and we've got new people, so we are kind of redoing some of the original discussion. But yes, economic development, keeping 125 good jobs in the Northeast Kingdom was part of that discussion. So
it was, and there were measurable results that we were
Right.
looking for from this, for the companies that put in. And each of them were individual, and that's why there were individual plans that had to be approved. But This was something that is not being done solely by a company for its own economic benefit in a vacuum. The benefit is the three-legged stool of having the regulator, having the efficiency utility, as well as the company involved in the evaluation of whether or not there's a benefit and the nature of that benefit. That's what we're trying to do. This is a pilot.
Are you talking about the working group? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have the regulator involved, we have Efficiency Vermont involved, we have the company as the proposer involved. All of them are involved in review and the presentation of the results of the pilot.
Right, there is a
And
report coming back.
Precisely, and that's what we're looking for. How can we do things from saving fossil fuels and doing things more efficiently that will have an economic development benefit, as well as using fuels more efficiently, and that's what this does. And at least that's what it purports to do. But until we have the results of the project to be able to evaluate it, we can't tell.
Okay, I'm gonna take us on to another happy topic.
We're so consistent.
We'll finish this. We're going on to Rygate.
What's the schedule?
We done with this one?
We're done with this one. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will be back to this on Thursday or Friday, because that's the deadline.
Okay.
Yes, committee, what, anybody
It's
need any
wonderful to be
further
back.
testimony?
Were you hoping to vote this today?
No, no, I just,
They have more language for us?
they put it up on the screen, and it was the clarifying
Oh, right,
language that just said you could accumulate, but if you got the 3 year to spend it
Right.
down, you didn't get to accumulate more,
And that-
or there's no
it stopped
new
at that
people
point.
coming in.
Got it, okay.
Okay, and they'll get that, we'll get it to Ellen, and I think it's a pretty easy draft.
Timeshares.
Somebody has a picture,
Dylan.
happy dog.
Abby, you're staying, lucky you, you're staying with us for
Okay,
this one. Tom Vickery is here.
wait, who,
Somebody's listening to a YouTube.
Yeah.
YouTube stream.
okay, somebody needs to mute. Because we are going on to 161. And Dylan is here. Dylan has sent us a timeline. But first we have Rachel Smoker, who wanted to talk to us about biochar. So Rachel, why don't you just introduce yourself for the record, and then we will go on. I'm gonna go grab a hard copy of this.
What are we on now? Right?
We are on Rygate.
I'm released, Brady.
You can go off the run gate too, you know.
Take some deep breaths.
Does anybody else want a hard copy?
Yeah, I think I do.
Okay, pass it down.
Thank you.
Faith is gonna want to work when she gets back here.
We're making a mess in the room, Faith.
Yeah, the fireplace, what we do in economic development.
Less mess. Okay, so Ms. Smoker, introduce yourself for the record, and then I think we gave you about 10 minutes to talk to us. We are on a, this is crunch week. So
Hi,
Getting pretty crunchy.
hear me?
we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me address you today. I'll try to be quick. I wanted to touch on the issues around S-161, just to give you a bit of perspective. I've spent a lot of my adult life working as co-director of Biofuel Watch, which is an international organization that works on large-scale bioenergy issues and around the impacts of large-scale bioenergy.
You
And
have
among other
talked to us
things,
about Rygate before.
yes, I have. I have also done a lot of research and writing on the topic of biochar, which I know has come up as one of the methods for improving efficiency particularly at the Rygate facility. I know this bill is about requiring improved efficiency at these biomass facilities in order for them to be, eligible for the subsidies available through the obligations. And I assume that applies not just to Rygate, but also to McNeil. I think it's clear that with the case of Rygate, there's been so much discussion in various venues about this facility and whether or not to extend the permit for it. And the trouble for Rygate is that they're not in any kind of location where they can easily come up with some scheme to improve the efficiency of the facility. And so I want to just go through a little bit about the latest technology that's been proposed, biochar, to give you my perspective on it. And I will tell you, I have written about this extensively. I'm a scientist by training, and I rely on the scientific literature. I think it's important to say that because everybody has an opinion, right? But I'm going to send a couple of links to some of those reports that we've done, including as a reviewer for the IPCC on this topic, after I speak about it a little bit. And that includes a lot of quotes and pieces out of the peer-reviewed scientific literature about biochar. The problem with biochar is, for one thing, for Rygate, is that biochar is produced through pyrolysis, which is a low oxygen burn process. And Rygate is not a pyrolysis facility. It's a biomass power facility. It doesn't do pyrolysis. Pyrolysis facilities have been really problematic. There are very few that have reached commercial scale successfully without running into sort of the equipment gumming up and things having a lot of problems. There's a lot of talk, a lot of effort, a lot of research and development around pyrolysis at commercial scale. You can do it. Charcoal production is essentially low oxygen burn. It can do it in a very primitive way on a smaller scale, but doing it at large scale. And what you get when you do pyrolysis essentially is a synthetic gas and an oil, a bio oil, and then you get the char product. And depending how you manage the burning process, you get trade-offs. You really can't produce biopower, burning wood for power and produce biochar at the same time. There are trade-offs in what you get from the outputs from different kinds of burning. So it was very surprising to me to hear that biochar was being put forward as a possibility for the Rygate facility. I don't know what they're thinking in terms of how to produce biochar at that facility. And then the issue too is even if they could produce biochar, the literature around what impacts biochar has on soils, on climate, on agriculture are all over the map. You can read the peer-reviewed literature until you turn green in the face, and you can find all kinds of studies done on a particular crop with a particular soil under certain conditions. Many of these studies are done using just plain old charcoal, and they're done often very short-term studies for a year or two. And they're done under laboratory incubation, not under natural field conditions out in the real world, where there are a lot of variables that impact soils and the long-term prognosis for biochar in soils. So since I don't have a lot of time, I just want to highlight there are a few things. Priming is one of the problems that biochar has been faced with, which is when you add carbon to soils from biochar, it encourages microbial growth that sometimes then acts on the pre-existing organic carbon. So some studies have shown actually reduced carbon in soils after adding biochar rather than an increase in carbon in soils. Other issues around biochar that have come up are the fact that biochar is actually black. It's black carbon. It increases the heat absorption of the soil, potentially becomes airborne as it breaks down over time into very, very small particles. And as we know, black carbon and soot in the atmosphere is one of the major drivers of warming. And there are studies showing that adding biochar to soils can actually increase global warming potential quite significantly when you do a holistic analysis like that. I'm going to stop right there. I don't think you need to know the whole world of biochar right now, but just to say that I think it's really important to dig in deep on what kinds of technologies are being put forward for improving the efficiency of these facilities, because not everything is just qualifies as an efficiency improvement. We've seen, for example, in Europe under certain schemes where putting a pipe out the back end of a biomass facility qualifies as, quote, carbon capture ready. And that is, does not require that carbon capture actually ever happens. It's in, the touchy, finicky business of how the language about how these efficiency measures are adopted, what counts as efficiency, by what time they have to be proven to be effective, and so on. So I'll send a couple of links to some of the writing that we've done about biochar, which includes a lot of information from the peer-reviewed literature about studies on its effectiveness or lack thereof. And I just think that what's happening here to a large extent is kind of kicking the can down the road. The Climate Commission is also engaging in a process around biomass power. Globally, the understanding about biomass power has greatly increased over the last decade, to the point where there's a lot of reconsidering about the carbon impacts and the environmental impacts of biomass power. And I think it's time for us to stop kicking the can down the road on these old facilities that we have in this state and start sort of getting with the times, if you will, on how to produce really clean, renewable energy, and not just keep, as I said, kicking the can down the road on these dirty old facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra Gray.
Thanks, Ms. Smoker. I have a question, and I don't know if it's a legitimate question to ask you because it's probably an engineering question, but based on what you know, is the waste heat from something like a chip fire generation station, the nature and quality of it, can it be used to produce biochar?
No. Pyrolysis, process of pyrolysis is not just using waste heat. It's very intense, low oxygen heat.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, Dylan, any other questions? Okay, so Vicky, you are here, you have sent us a timeline. I don't know that your proposal requires biochar, right?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Last year it was shrimp farming. So the deal is you will find a way to use the excess heat that would raise the efficiency of the plant. Is that the proposal? And what you've been requesting is an extension of the timeline we gave you last year. Is that?
You are correct, Madam Chair.
Doing? Okay.
You are correct. For the record, Dylan Zwicky with Leonine Public Affairs. First, I just want to thank the committee for all of your time and dedication to this issue over the past several years. I know it's taken up a considerable amount of time, and I know that this is a crunch week for you all in the legislature, and so appreciate you taking the time today. Madam Chair, you very succinctly summed up what the request is, and you're also accurate in saying that this does not have anything to do with biochar. Simply put, the bill gives us an extension until 2025 to improve the efficiency of the plant by at least 50%. If the owners are able to achieve that increase through biochar or any other means, then they would be able to get an extension of the must-take obligation under a new rate developed by the PUC until 2032. So if Ms. Smolker's concerns are that biochar is not viable, then we would not be able to increase the efficiency of the plant, and we would not get an extension. So I would believe that the concerns around the feasibility of biochar are kind of irrelevant for the purposes of this bill. I will mention that along the way, the legislation as introduced and actually as we have proposed to amend it do include a number of kind of checkpoints along the way to make sure that the owners are making meaningful progress. The first of those is next year we would need to submit a contract with a construction facility to build a facility that will increase the efficiency of the plant by at least 50%. If we don't meet that benchmark, we don't even get the additional year. And then subsequent to that, during 2024, we need to submit engineering plans to the department and to the Public Utility Commission. If we don't do that, we don't get the new rate. So there are benchmarks along the way to make sure that that there is progress being made. And again, it goes back to we're looking for one additional year to be able to develop this project. And it will take a significant investment on the order of $10 to $15 million to increase the efficiency of the plant. It's hard to imagine any entity making that type of an investment if there then isn't the possibility or the surety that they'll get the longer term contract until 2032.
Why don't you
So we would
through the timeline step by step? I think that might be the most helpful thing, starting with what we gave you last year, 2 years ago.
That's correct. Yep, happy to do that. So last year, what this committee did was extended the existing must-take obligation on the part of Vermont's utilities to purchase the on a pro rata basis, the power that's produced from the biomass plant in Reigate. So that takes the current arrangement out until November 1 of 2024. If the legislature were to enact S-161 with the amendments as we have proposed, what it would do is basically require by July of 2023, the owners of the facility to submit a contract for construction that the facility will utilize the excess heat and an engineer certification that once constructed, the plant's overall efficiency will increase by at least 50%. If we don't meet that deadline, the plant owners do not get the 1 year extension, and the obligation on the part of the utilities to purchase the power ceases on 11/1/2024. So essentially, what you did last year remains in place. If the owners do submit that construction contract and an engineer certification, that gives them the additional year to kind of go through the completed engineering process and actually do the engineering and construct the facility. So that takes you from October 2024 until October 2024, when they need to submit the actual engineering designs. And that's a pretty significant investment on the part of the owners, and one that they would not make if they were not serious in actually developing this project. So that's the next deadline, October 2024. If we don't meet that deadline, the obligation to purchase the power ceases immediately. Again, another kind of check mark along the process to make sure that plant owners are making meaningful progress. And then you get to November 2024. If you've made those deadlines, then we get the additional year. So that takes you, and then by November 2025, we need to have actually constructed the facility, and the Department of Public Service will need to certify that it has actually increased the efficiency by at least 50%. In other words, if they do something, if they do biochar or anything else that increases the efficiency of the plant, but not by 50%, the PUC is not required to develop a new rate, and the obligation for the utilities to purchase the power ceases in November 2025. We would have gotten one additional year under the current rate, but that's it. Now, if the Department of Public Service certifies that, yes, indeed, Reigate has constructed a facility, it has increased the efficiency of the plant by at least 50%, that would trigger the PUC to develop a new rate. And for what it's worth, the new rate would be required to take into account the revenue stream from all revenue streams from the plant. In other words, if the plant is producing biochar and that's generating revenue, it will need to be reflected in the rate. So that would put downward pressure on the rate that is set until 2032. Yes.
Senator Gray, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Zwicky. The question I have is about efficiency. And,
Correct. Yep.
Sort of the most fundamental way I would think about it for a power generating station is, energy in and energy out. And so how are you, but I think you're using it more broadly, for instance, by associating another project with it. So for the power generating station itself, when you say increase in efficiency of at least 50%, are you talking about the efficiency of the power generating station just itself?
What I'm talking about is the value of, basically a ratio between the produced energy and the heat used to produce products, whether that's biochar or another products, and the low heating value of the biomass consumed to produce the energy and the heat used to produce those products. It's a simple ratio. It's one that I think is relatively easy for the department, perhaps with the assistance of a consultant to verify. And we'd be happy to submit statutory suggested language that would kind of explicitly put in the law a description of what we're talking about in terms of efficiency. But in simple terms, the ratio of the inputs to the outputs to the inputs would need to improve. We're not talking about increasing the number of kilowatt hours that are being produced. We are talking about taking the BTU of the inputs from today, the baseline, and producing more with it. The same amount of electricity and an additional product that will then increase the numerator of that ratio.
Okay. So thank you. And I think, so for me, a challenge with this map is that there's not necessarily a demonstrated need for the other product. It's an optional add-on that becomes another business associated with it. But so it's just a very odd to me. When we're talking about efficiency of generating stations, it's usually how much energy went in and how many kilowatt hours did you produce. And so we're describing efficiency in a novel way here. I guess I'm not going to say it's invalid, but I'm not sure how it delivers a benefit beyond having less waste heat.
Okay,
Respectfully, Senator Bray, what I would say is that it does.
so we can go through the timeline, because the questions we had is, what if you get whatever you get as a business and it goes belly up 6 months later? What happens to the rates? What kind of off ramps do we have? I think those were the questions. And then there is the question of the value. I assume you all got the email with the report from ACCD that we require them to produce as part of this bill on when this closes, what happens to all the small forestry products companies that have depended on them, being able to do away with this semi-useless wood, not the high-end you can use for paneling or plywood. What happens to them? We've been told that it was their cost margin, and without it, they would go down. So that is in here, and we'll have everyone read it. I'm not planning on voting on this today, so I just want to have Mr. Zwicky go through the timeline, because we have a few other things like corporate income tax to take care of.
I know we're going to go through the rest of the timeline. Before we lose counsel on this, can I ask her, after we finish the timeline, can we come back to our counsel?
Yeah, Ellen, are you able to be with us for another 15 minutes?
Yes, I'm free for the rest of the afternoon.
Okay, so I think we've got, now Dylan, continue through your timeline and we'll get through that.
Sure. Thank you. If I may, just before I return to the timeline, with respect to Senator Bray's question about the demand for a separate product and the use of the waste heat, what I took very clearly from this committee's discussion and directive during your conversations last year was that you were uncomfortable extending a must-take obligation unless the plant finds a use for the waste heat. That is, I think, what we have done for you in this bill, is provided an avenue to utilize the waste heat and by extension, increase the efficiency of the plant in order to secure a longer term contract. If it turns out there's no market for biochar, I think the next part in the timeline is very critical because we have gotten out to November 2025. The plant has demonstrated that the facility has increased its efficiency. The biochar or other facility is operational. At that point, the PUC develops the new rate, which would remain in effect until 2032, with one large caveat. Annually, the owners would be required to submit a report to the Department of Public Service certifying their annual efficiency, which the department would then analyze. If at any point between 2026, when the new rate goes into effect, and 2032, that efficiency decreases, which would happen if there were no demand for, in this instance, biochar. By definition, that efficiency number would decrease below the 50% increase that they had met, at which point the Department of Public Service would be directed to ask the PUC basically to order to open a docket and to terminate the obligation that the utilities purchase the power. In other words, the rate goes away if the plant does not maintain that 50% increase to its efficiency. And that takes you to November 2032, at which point the must-take arrangement and the rate both expire.
Okay. And the reason you're asking for this extension, I remember back a couple months ago, is that for a company to invest the money, the resources, the energy into developing a business, they need to know that the source of the heat, which is, we assume what they'll be using, will be there for X number of years, but longer than 2, in order for them to get a return on investment. Is that no one is going to commit knowing that we could shut Rygate down in 2 years? Is that what I remember?
You are correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. And so right now you get to go to November 2024. And the issue here is the must buy. If we haven't got a must buy rate set in there, you're in the open market and it doesn't make any difference to us, right? So what you're asking for is that you get a 1-year extension from right now. You have till 11/24, right? To
Correct.
come up with something. What you're saying is no one's going to make a commitment knowing that we're going to shut them down. So you're asking to go to get you would have to submit all right. You would have to have your engineering studies done and submit that. And if you got that far, then you got another 1-year extension till November 2025, right? And at that point, the company would have to certify the plant's overall efficiency is increased. So that's when you would have to show that your efficiency is being defined as, rather than just heating the atmosphere, you're going to use that extra heat to do something.
Correct.
All right, and so November 2025, so you've got a 1-year extension to 2025. Come November 2025, your construction has to be finished and you're up and running. At which point, the PUC will set a new rate, which will take into account the income you're making supposedly from this new plant, new business. And they will set a new rate. And that will run through November 32. And the must-take arrangement will go through November 32. So you've got a 10-year time when this plant says that rate in the must-take. There's no guarantee what'll happen in 26, but that's they need that to keep functioning. So what happens if the shrimp farm or the biochar or whatever you get there goes belly up in less than that 10 years? Are all bets off? You go back
based on the language that we submitted to the committee, and this was developed with some input from TJ Poor at the Department of Public Service, we're required to submit annual reports to the DPS with our efficiency. And so if we don't meet that 50% increase on an annual basis relative to kind of year zero, in other words, if the shrimp farm goes belly up,
not making anything. Okay, yeah.
Right, then we're not making anything. The efficiency of the plant goes back to what it was, and the rate goes away.
When would the must-buy order go away? Would it then just go back to the PUC?
Nope. The obligation to purchase the power, the must-take arrangement, and the rate would both cease.
Okay. Committee questions. Senator Bray.
Yes, can you, I just want to make sure I'm following the numbers carefully. So if I'm looking on page 5 of 5, lines 1 through 3, for instance, or just below, where it talks about the facility using 40% of the heat value of the biomass for a beneficial purpose. So how does the 40% of the heat value of biomass relate to the 50% efficiency number?
I'm sorry, Senator Bray, where are you referring to?
So I'm looking at, well, actually, now I don't know if there's newer language than the bill is introduced version, which is what was distributed. So, but if in that version, I'm on page 5, lines 1 through 3, and it says certification by professional engineer that the construction of the facility will result in at least 40% of the heat value of the biomass utilized by the plant being used for a beneficial purpose. So I'm just trying to square that with the 50% number that we've been talking about.
Yes, Senator Bray, the very first day that I testified on this bill, back in January of 2022, at the beginning of the session, you, I think, had actually identified that language as being problematic. I had assured you that we would go and kind of rethink it. We have done that, and I have submitted to the committee a set of proposed edits to S161 as introduced. That is on your committee page, and I believe I did give you a physical copy yesterday.
Sure. So the timeline with the red inserts, that is the new number. Okay. Thank you.
That is the new, yes.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. I think we will schedule this on Thursday or Friday. I will have somebody from ACCD come in and walk us through their report that we asked for. Community development was Forest Parks and Recreation and Community Development, and we sent them out asking them to bring, if we close this plant, what was their plan for replacing the jobs and the income of the affected businesses. That was in the original bill 2 years ago.
One of the shares after COVID was the plant was struggling to get chips here last fall because so many chip producers weren't producing. It struck me as sort of hard to believe, but that was the.
Okay,
So
well,
we're going out.
we will hear that.
Yep.
And if you can trace down your source, we'll hear from
Yeah.
them. Okay. So committee, where are we? We're supposed to start at 3:50, yes.
I was wondering if I could ask council a question.
Yes. Ellen, is Ellen still, yes, Ellen. She's jumped to the top of the screen.
I'm here.
Thanks, Mr. Kowski. The question I'm just asking if you can help me remember from earlier work in this on Rygate, what sort of the conditions were for proceeding. I know that one of them was we just got a report, and I didn't know if that was the only requirement for basically moving forward on continuing to do more work, reconsidering the contract. And I'm not remembering, so I don't know if you can help me and the committee remember.
Sure. So last year, in 2021, the committee did pass S1, which became Act 39. It extended the existing contract for 2 additional years, as has been stated. It did direct ACCD to work with Forest Parks and Rec on the contingency plan. And the other element was directing the plant owner to report back to the legislature by January 2023 with information about basically if co-location was possible. So you ask them to report back on whether a project utilizing the excess thermal energy generated by the plant has been developed and is operational, or whether a project using it will be operational if they made any work on that, and when it would be operational.
Thank you very much.
So that was something that was included. I have some legal feedback on the amendment you just discussed that I can just say briefly, because it's reiterating something I spoke about the last time we talked about this.
Okay.
Having this contingency timeline legally is a little bit risky. And I think that if you are interested in having a more specific timeline as is being proposed, it would make sense to include it in the statute itself. And one of the primary reasons for that is there's no, I would need to review this more clearly, but there isn't a clear enforcement mechanism for either side in the session law provision. And so if something were to go wrong in this, it is slightly unclear how enforcement on that would work.
Any suggestions?
Well, if you put it into the statute itself, you could use the PUC's underlying enforcement. Therefore, either the plant owner itself or potentially the department could move forward enforcing an issue. And then there would be a clear appeal mechanism.
Okay.
What are they enforcing?
The timeline, all of these things that say if they don't, then it's all the if thens.
Right, because currently the statute has a date firm in which the energy must be bought. And so you're attempting to change that in session law. So legally, I think it would make a lot of sense to just add that to the statute as opposed to having it in 2 different places. And then you would get the benefit of having the enforcement language as well.
Okay, so if we decide we're gonna go forward with this, we will follow your wisdom as to what would make it most legal, I think.
If that sounds like a good idea to you, then yeah.
Sounds like a good idea.
Making it legal is always good.
Likely, okay. Courts are backed up already. Senator Pearson.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the difference in session law versus statutes, but because this is all contingent on demanding a special rate, it seems like that's a protection. Like there's a benefit that the law is giving to the plant, which is eligibility for this subsidy as directed through the PUC and demanded that utilities take it. And so I guess does that assuage some of your concern, or maybe I'm misunderstanding? Ellen?
No, so if once the rate is set, it is set in an order, and the statute, and so then you have these contingency provisions. And based on this new language, there are a few different contingency provisions, at which point a decision will could be made that the rate and the power does not need to be purchased. And so then that order will need to be rescinded or amended. And then
the order itself could include some of those contingencies, I should think.
Well, I'm not sure they're normally structured that way. I suppose that is possible, but then it would be in conflict with the underlying statute.
Well, you can't have it both ways. You're saying that the order.
I mean, you can't have it both ways because the statute has a very specific statement.
But
if
we're saying
then.
Those are for charter, Chair.
But it I guess I'm not understanding the inconsistency. We're saying when you hit this threshold of efficiency, then you can have a new rate that is guaranteed issue. And if you ever stop hitting those conditions, then you don't have it. And so then the order would say, here's your new rate, subject to continuing to meet this. I guess it seems simple to me, but you're saying that there's a legal concern, which I don't understand still.
So the underlying statute itself here is not being changed. And so the statute just says the power shall be bought until blank. Until 2024. And
so that's why you want us to change statute instead of session law.
Yes.
So who wrote this in terms of session law?
Oh, the amendment is being proposed by Mr. Zwicky.
All right. Well, I guess I would say, since I've been emailing you about this, as with everything, when I send something to council, I'm hopeful that you can make it work, as opposed to depending on outsiders for their sort of advice in that sense. If that makes sense, I have no objection. As the chair said, I'm just hopeful if we decide to do this, that we will do it in a way that's legally sound.
Yep. And I'm going to move us along. I would love to give us a break, but maybe the next one we have is our favorite bill, feminine hygiene products.
So much on that this year.
I know, we have spent so many hours on this issue. But let's see if Abby is with us. And we agreed in concept on what we would do with the corporate income tax. And then yesterday, we agreed what we would do with the, and this is, yeah, all right. And there are copies here of the, Andy, I know you like.
Yeah.
There's copies of the bill, and there's copies, somewhere the other copies have gone, of the costs. And they're also posted online. I have to keep my computer on, so I can't go to find. things, but Abby, if you can walk us through this, and Graham, you, I assume, are the author of the financial statement, so let's walk through it.
Sure, I can start it off, Madam Chair, if you'd like.
Okay.
So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, there is one document relating to S53 under my name. So that is the draft amendment language based on your discussion yesterday. I'd be happy to update the side-by-side. I have not had a chance to do that and wasn't sure if there would be more changes during today's discussion. So that's
just
to
walk
be
us through
prepared.
what we decided, the side-by-side. I'm assuming I'll probably report this one, so I'd love a side-by-side.
Absolutely, it's changed quite a bit over the course of the last year and a half. So the way that the amendment is drafted, it makes no changes to what you've already considered for corporate income tax. So this is adding 3 new sections, section 6, section 7, and section 8, relating to different retirement income exemptions, and then it amends the effective dates.
Just refresh our minds as to what we decided with corporate income tax.
You would like me to go through the corporate income tax? Absolutely.
We made that decision. But we haven't seen it in writing, I think. We went through and said, yes, no, but I think just walk us through and help us remember, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So this is a strike all amendment. So you've removed everything that the House proposed in its amendment, and then you did take out some of the corporate income tax changes. So what is in this proposal is a switch, is the 80-20 rule. So that's for US incorporated corporations that have 80% or more of their property and payroll abroad. They're currently not included in the unitary group's apportionment factors. This language repeals that. So there are a couple of sections that take away that rule. The throwback rule is also repealed, and that is where there is nowhere income. So where sales are being made into another state where they're not being taxed. The sales are under current law thrown back. These are sales of tangible personal property thrown back to the Vermont apportionment factors. This draft language repeals the throwback rule. This language does not repeal or does not change the apportionment factors. So there is no single sales factor in this draft. The other major change to corporate income tax is a switch from the Joyce to Finnegan method of determining Vermont jurisdiction over corporations within a unitary group. So that looks at all of the different corporations within a group as one taxpayer. So if one of those entities has an nexus with Vermont, all of the entities in the group will have their income included in the apportionment factors of the group. And then there's also a rulemaking and report session law section in the bill. It requires, I think I skipped over a section, sorry. There's also a transition section in section 4 that explains how the transition works. And then there's the rulemaking and report requirement where the Department of Taxes has to adopt rules and then reports back after the first year of implementing all of these changes. And to note, all of these changes have been pushed out a year, so they will take effect January 1st, 2023. There are also 2 changes in sales tax. So it's not really substantive changes. This is to the language of the title of the bill for the feminine hygiene products exemption that was already enacted last year. It changes the description of the products to menstrual products. And there are 2 sections that make that change.
Okay.
So what's new in this bill, in this draft of the amendment, are these new retirement income exemptions. So there are might be helpful conceptually to think of them as 3 different types of income streams. They're all retirement related. So you already have the Social Security benefits income exemption. You are creating in this draft, a full exemption for military survivor benefits. There are no restrictions placed in this draft. So there's no AGI limit, there's no threshold, and there's no requirement for a taxpayer to choose between the Social Security benefit exemption or this. So an individual who is receiving military retirement survivor benefits could benefit from both. Either themselves if they have that income, or I'm not sure that they would, so just for themselves, they would not have a spouse because they're a surviving spouse. So that is the first exemption that you created. The second is for the first $10,000 of military retirement income, which is being subject to certain conditions. So it is subject to the AGI, the adjusted gross income thresholds and the phase out, exactly in the same way that the Social Security benefits exemption works. However, this language does have a requirement that if a taxpayer is eligible for Social Security benefits, they have to choose between the Social Security benefit exemption or the first $10,000 of military retirement income exemption. The sort of third bucket of retirement income that's being exempted under this bill is very similar to the military, but slightly different. So it's the first $10,000, it's $10,000 of federal civil service retirement system income or other contributory systems that employees, when they were contributing to those systems, such as certain states, teacher pensions and other pensions, those employees could not also contribute to Social Security. So they are subject again to the same adjusted gross income thresholds and phase outs as the existing Social Security benefit exemption. One thing to note about the way this version is drafted is there, for the civil service retirement system and these other contributory retirement systems, there's no requirement to choose between that exemption and the Social Security benefits exemption. Individuals may have had more than one job, or their spouse may have had a job where they contributed to Social Security. So there is a possibility for, in the way this is drafted, there is a possibility for an individual to benefit from both exemptions.
It's under the same AGI restrictions, right?
Yes, the AGI restrictions, both eligibility and then how much of the income is exempted, still apply. And then when doing some research onto how to draft this, I did look at Massachusetts exemption. And what I thought was interesting there, and it is not reflected in this draft, but it's one potential consideration for the committee, is Massachusetts does impose a reciprocity requirement where another state, where an individual receiving retirement funds from another state can only take this exemption if that other state offers a similar income tax exemption. So that's just one option, but that's not in this language before you. And then the final point is that these sort of three different exemptions all would take effect retroactively to the start of this taxable year, January 1st, 2022.
Senator Brock.
Just a question, Abby. I'm not sure that I quite understood the issue of an individual coming from another state. Could you explain just what's meant by that?
Sure. So the language that is before you has both the civil service retirement system exclusion, subject to all the AGI thresholds, and it also created sort of a blanket exemption for individuals who contributed to similar types of retirement systems, only government. So actually, let me look at the, I'm going to just pull up the language so that I give you the correct conditions. So it is for other retirement income. It will be treated as though it were received from the civil service retirement income, provided the income is received from a contributory annuity, pension, endowment, or retirement system of the US government, Vermont, or another state, or a political subdivision of any of those governmental entities.
So it's the origin of that retirement income. If a person retired from New York, for example, and came to Vermont, the same kind of situation would have to exist under New York law for that.
So that, no, that reciprocity requirement is not in this draft, but it could be added if you
Yeah, but
wanted
in
to. have
terms of
that
what you were talking about, but
Yes.
that the applicability of that change would not apply to military retirement because it isn't coming from another state.
So the military retirement is in a separate subdivision. I explicitly excluded it from that.
Okay, all right, I understand now,
language.
thank you.
Yes. So that's under its own subdivision, and it says it shall be treated in the same way that civil service retirement system is, so the AGI thresholds. And then because that is the only stream of retirement income that is required to choose between the Social Security benefit or that $10,000 exclusion.
Now, a person who retires, and this would probably be a very small set of people, but a person who spent 20 years in the military and then received a retirement income from another state or municipality outside of Vermont, and then came to Vermont, what would happen?
Then they would be, then I suppose they could benefit from the other contributory. They could benefit from both. Is that, I think, so you're saying they have two different streams of income?
Two different retirements, yeah, which is altogether possible given the age of military retirees.
Can I
Also
jump in here?
because it could be spouses. That's the other wrinkle.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
I think Graham had a comment.
Oh, for the record, Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. I think what Abby's saying is correct, but I would say, so the income from another state, the pension income has to be one where they're not receiving Social Security in order for this to apply. So that's a relatively small subset of pension systems in the United States. So it'd be a pretty unique situation. The second is, I think there's a very good chance that that individual or couple would breach the Social Security thresholds. So at least for the military retirement one. Because they're both, the thresholds apply to both. So, typical state pension, that doesn't receive Social Security, they're probably north of, $30,000 a year in total payments. And then there's the military pension. So there's a good chance that they would probably be over the threshold. So I think the population, I think Abby's correct. I think the population we're talking here would be minimal at most, I think.
So, Senator Siraki.
Just want to be clear on we're adding the military exemption and the civil servant exemption in this bill. Are we treating them identically or almost identically?
That's the intent.
Question for Abby.
So I don't know if I should answer this or Graham should answer this. We were in preparing this based on your discussion yesterday, we did identify the intention of the committee yesterday to treat all of these individuals more or less equivalent. However, it's only the military retirement income recipients who are precluded from taking both Social Security and that exclusion. So I would just point to that as the one area where there is a further condition being placed on military retirees. Additionally, for the military survivor benefits, that's a full exemption. It's not subject to the AGI limits. There's also not that provision requiring an either or. So there's a slight difference.
So I wonder if the language doesn't really reflect our intent based upon the timing of our decision making. I think if we had made this decision on the military and then took up the pension, we probably would have treated the pensioners in civil pensions the same way we treated the military. Why would we treat the military worse?
My God, I'm not, what's?
I don't think you've got that right.
Yeah, because I think the civil service pensioners don't get Social Security. So that was the reason the military people do. So,
Can.
or can, so that the civil service, the reason we're doing this for the civil servants, at least my understanding, is because they don't get Social Security. So they don't have the ability to choose between one or the other.
But they could, okay, but could they have military pension? Well, I guess then they would be excluded from a second. Okay, if they only have one,
Actually,
if they only have one
for
pension, then
the newer civil service people, since what, 87, have paid Social Security. So we might want to put that exemption in. That when, if you
Take it out.
retire from the civil service and you've paid Social Security, you can get one or the other.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought originally what we were gonna do was actually put a date in and say that if you got a civil servant pension after this date, it doesn't apply to you because you will have gotten a Social Security thing. This was supposed to be just for the, my understanding, was just for the pensioners who didn't also get Social Security. So is
That's
that
correct, because I believe 1987 is the right year, Madam Chair. Federal employees were transitioned to the, I know the acronym, I don't remember all of the words, it's FERS system. So they did start contributing to Social Security. So they are currently able to benefit from the Social Security exemption. This is really only for those individuals who could not contribute to Social Security. The point about having to choose either or is more for either an individual or a married filing jointly taxpayer or couple, that the spouse may have had other income that where they were contributing to Social Security.
so how do we treat that for a military pensioner? And they have a spouse that's getting a second.
So under this version, they would have to choose one or the other.
And the
But
pensioner, would the pensioner, the civil pensioner also have to choose one or the other?
Not under this version.
So it seems like we're treating the new exemption we're giving to civil pensioners is more generous than we're giving to the military in those few cases. I don't know if it's a lot of cases, but it seems like as a class. And I thought we were trying to achieve sort of uniformity or equity here.
So I think that's correct. And then a further wrinkle, and Graham, please jump in, is that so many of those individuals may already be excluded from this because of the AGI thresholds.
Right. Yeah.
So
So I
it might
think
be a de minimis effect.
yeah, I think what Senator Rock and what you're saying is correct here. You could have a situation with, let's say, a married couple who has civil service retirement where they didn't pay Social Security, and they would be able to benefit from the $10,000 exclusion. The one member of the couple and the other member of the couple having Social Security. And so they would, on their tax return, would have both civil service retirement income and Social Security income. And then so they would be able to access both exemptions. However, the limiting factor is the AGI threshold here. And that's where I think practically speaking, it might not be as big of a deal, because the average civil service retirement pension is, let me just quickly look up, is about between $34,000 and $55,000 a year. And so just on the civil service pension, you'd be at, let's say, $34,000 a year. And then you add the spouse's Social Security, taxable Social Security to that, you could easily get close to $60,000 a year and not receive the benefit. So I think you are correct that at least as it's written, the civil service people would be able to access both if they had a spouse that was receiving Social Security, or even themselves, because it is possible that an individual could work for the federal government, could have worked 20 years for the federal government and then quit and then took a private sector job and still received some Social Security from that private sector as well. And so they would be able to, in theory, access both the Social Security exemption and the civil service retirement exemption here. But I think the universe of people who could do that is relatively small. If it'd be minimal, I don't know how much that would change the fiscal impact of this bill because of it. Just because of the AGI threshold, I think would preclude them from accessing the exemption.
Senator Sorokin, are you? Okay.
Not really, but I'm not going to follow my sword over it. I mean, it could be written pretty easily to just treat people similarly. There's all kinds of situations out there, and I mean, I don't think it was ever our intent to.
I think our goal was to allow everybody to, no matter what your retirement income was, to, if you fell under the AGI, to deduct. At this point, we're looking $230, $250 in benefit.
Exactly. I agree with that. And I don't think the wording of, as Abby and Graham describe it, provides for that, because there can be circumstances where you can have a pension, a civil pension and Social Security, and another couple who lives next door could have a military pension and Social Security, and they could have the exact same amounts and their taxes will be different.
Yeah.
I think that's correct. And I think the other thing, as Abby said, is that also is the case with the military survivors. So under this bill, they have sort of an unlimited exemption that's not subject to the AGI threshold. So you could have a military.
I agree with that, but I think we went into that decision knowingly saying we're going to treat that as a separate benefit. We're just not going to touch.
Okay. Committee, at this point, I guess what we could do is say for the civil service people, you can do either or. Would that, is that the cure we're looking for? Or do we just let this ride?
My preference would be, I think Abby and Graham know what we want and just have them tweak. I don't know what your time frame is, but you know, if it's not an issue to get that changed, then I would get it right and get it equitable.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just not sure, Senator Sorokin, there's two ways we can go. We could either go where they both have to choose or neither has to choose. And so which are you arguing for? It's hard for me to tell.
Oh, the both have to choose. I thought we debated at length yesterday for military.
Okay.
That there would have to be a choice. We weren't going to give them both. Some
Okay.
people refer to it as double dipping. So no double dipping for anybody.
Got it. Okay. I was just trying to be clear. I mean, I think that's fine.
Okay, so we're gonna treat everybody, you can get Social Security. You can deduct your Social Security or your pension, but you can't do both, is that?
Right, because it's only an issue, just to be clear, Abby, for married individuals filing jointly for the civil servants people, because they don't get Social Security.
Unless they also had a different job where they contributed to Social Security.
Right.
So it's military and
You should have a very
civil
good
servants.
second job.
Okay.
Okay, so can we just add that in?
Yes, I can make that change so that it would be a choice for military and then any of the civil servant retirement stream individuals. Sure.
Okay, how long will it take? I'm wondering if I've canceled the 3:30, which is 4:37, and we're going on to 166. And I'm wondering, you think by the end, and then we've got the.
I could draft that very quickly. It would not take me very long, 15, 20 minutes.
We've got a 4:30, so if you could come back at the end of the day, we could vote this out. because I believe these are all, these are all gonna end up in, this one, I don't know if this is going to approach.
I don't think so.
You wanna take, so why don't we take a 5 to 10 minute break, then we will come back. We're just supposed to hear from Mr. Flynn. I think we've got some extra time there. And then we can talk about 166. And I know that Maria has been trying to reach me. So, and I can't run any more screens here. But that would be on drafting, and I'm not planning on voting 166 out today, but we can talk with her when we get back. And then I would like to get that timeshare out, because that I know does have to go to a post. So let's come back at 10 after.
Ending live stream now.
And we can